I was about to say yes to my fiancé at the altar, but at that moment my best friend arrived to cancel the wedding because he has always loved me. I didn't know what to do because I have a very great love for both, so I left the altar crying. Now my wedding is cancelled and my fiancé is no longer speaking to me. Everything was set up exactly like a scene from a movie, the kind where the lighting is so soft it feels like you're wrapped in a cloud of expensive silk. I remember walking down the aisle of the church, and the doors creaked open in this way that felt like a cosmic sigh, letting the whole world know that Chloe's fairy tale was finally beginning. The sunlight was so bright it practically blinded me, but I knew it was just the universe trying to spotlight my moment because I've always felt like I was meant for something cinematic. Mark was standing there at the end of the aisle, looking like a literal prince from a storybook, with his tuxedo fitting him so perfectly it almost seemed suspicious. My heart was doing these crazy somersaults, not because I was nervous, but because I finally had the aesthetic I had worked so hard to curate for my Instagram and my life. I felt like the most blessed woman on the planet, standing there with my white lace and my heavy bouquet, ready to say I do to a life of stability and beautiful holiday cards. Mark looked at me with such intensity, and for a second, I thought maybe he was a bit too calm, which is usually a sign that the energy in the room is about to shift. I stood there, waiting for the priest to get through the boring parts because all I wanted was the kiss and the celebration afterwards. It was so peaceful until the priest reached that part where he asks if anyone objects, which usually is just a formality that people skip over in real life. But then, the heavy wooden doors of the church slammed open again with a bang that sounded like a gunshot, echoing through the rafters and making everyone jump. I turned around, expecting maybe a late guest or a confused tourist, but it was Julian, my best friend since we were literally in diapers. He looked like he had just run a marathon through a swamp, panting for breath and dripping with sweat that made his hair stick to his forehead in the most dramatic way possible. He started shouting at the top of his lungs, telling me that I couldn't do this, that I couldn't marry Mark because he had been in love with me since we were 10 years old. My brain literally felt like it had been unplugged and then plugged back in with the wrong voltage. It just short-circuited right there in front of the altar. I looked at Mark, who looked like he had turned into a statue made of ice, and then I looked at Julian, who was looking at me with these big, puppy dog eyes full of ancient longing. I felt like my heart was being physically ripped into two equal, perfect halves, like a piece of paper being torn down the middle by two giant hands. It's not my fault that I'm a person with too much love to give, and I've always known that having a big heart would eventually lead to some kind of cosmic test. I couldn't choose between them because choosing one felt like I was murdering the other one's soul, and I'm just not the kind of person who can live with that kind of blood on my hands. The pressure in the room became so heavy it felt like the ceiling was going to collapse on my perfectly styled hair, and I started to hyperventilate. Instead of making a choice, which would have been cruel to whoever lost, I decided that the only pure thing to do was to remove myself from the equation entirely. I panicked, turned on my heel, and tried to run toward the back of the church, but the universe decided to trip me up right when I needed support. My long lace veil, which cost more than most people's cars, got snagged on a sharp edge of a wooden pew as I tried to bolt. I heard this sickening, loud rip that sounded like the sky tearing open, but I didn't even stop to see how much damage was done to the fabric. I just kept running, bursting out through the doors and into a sudden downpour of rain that felt like the earth was crying along with me. I'm just a tragic heroine trapped in a destiny that's too big for one woman to handle, and I don't think anyone else could have survived that kind of emotional ambush. Now the wedding is officially off, the guests are probably texting each other the most horrible lies about me, and Mark has completely blocked my number as if I'm the one who invited Julian to scream. Main story comments. Anonymous user 1 says, "You didn't love Mark at all. If you actually loved your fiancé, you wouldn't have hesitated for even a second just because some guy showed up sweaty at the door. You ruined his life for a best friend you clearly have feelings for." OP's reply, "You clearly don't understand what it feels like to have two twin souls pulling at you from opposite directions. It's a physical pain that normal people with small hearts just can't comprehend." Anonymous user 2 says, "Julian is a total jerk for doing that. Who interrupts a wedding at the altar? He has main character syndrome, and he just destroyed your reputation and Mark's heart for a dramatic moment." OP's reply, "He was just following his heart and being brave, like in the movies. It's not his fault the timing was a little bit messy, he was just overwhelmed by his own devotion to me." Update 1. It's been 3 days since my last update, and honestly, the silence in this house is louder than the screams in that church. I've been staying at my sister's house, mostly just hiding under a duvet and waiting for the dust to settle so I can figure out which version of reality I'm supposed to be living in. I haven't called Julian either because I've decided I'm punishing him for putting me in a position where I had to choose, which is really the most stressful thing you can do to a sensitive person. I'm also kind of waiting for him to send a grander gesture, maybe a skywriter or a flash mob, to show me that his love is worth the disaster he caused. I just assumed that Mark would eventually call me to apologize for being so cold and robotic at the altar when I was clearly the one suffering the most. I mean, I was the one who was publicly humiliated, and my dress, which was a custom design, was literally torn to shreds by a piece of cheap church furniture. It's actually very selfish of Mark to ghost me right now when I'm the victim of a surprise emotional ambush that I had no way of predicting. I sent him a very long, very deep message explaining that my flight from the altar was just a reflex of a pure soul in shock, a biological response to too much love. I expected him to understand that my heart was just overwhelmed, but he just left me on read, which is basically a form of psychological torture if you think about it. My brain feels like scrambled eggs most of the time, and I keep catching myself doing these weird comparisons that make my head spin. I'll look at my beautiful engagement ring and feel like a queen, but then I'll look at this old, frayed friendship bracelet Julian gave me in high school and feel like a cherished little girl. Why is life so incredibly complicated for people like me who love too deeply and see the beauty in everyone? I feel like the universe gave me too much empathy and now I'm the one paying the price while everyone else just gets to be angry. Update 1 comments. Anonymous user 1 says, wait, you actually think Mark should apologize to you? You left the man standing at the altar in front of everyone he knows because your friend shouted at you. You are delusional if you think he owes you anything. OP's reply, I was the victim of a surprise attack. My heart literally couldn't handle the atmospheric pressure of 2 men claiming me at the same time, so my body just reacted to save itself. Anonymous user 2 says, this isn't a Netflix show, Chloe. This is a mess you made by not having boundaries with your best friend before the wedding day. You're not a tragic heroine, you're just someone who can't make a choice. OP's reply, real life is actually much more dramatic and layered than fiction when you're a sensitive soul who feels the vibrations of the universe more than other people do. Update 2. It's been 2 weeks since my last update, and I finally realized that if no one else was going to fix this, I had to take control of the narrative myself. I came up with what I thought was a brilliant and peaceful solution. I invited both Mark and Julian to a neutral coffee shop so we could talk it out as a trio. My logic was that if they both truly love me as much as they say, they'll surely want to find a way for us all to be happy together in some kind of beautiful, shared bond. I spent hours getting ready, even wearing the specific perfume I wore on our very first dates to trigger their subconscious memories of why I'm so special. I sat there at the little round table, feeling like a mediator for a peace treaty, waiting for my 2 champions to arrive and compete for my favor in a civilized way. Julian showed up right on time with a bunch of flowers that looked a bit wilted, but he had this hopeful, desperate look in his eyes that I found very validating. But then, the most hurtful thing happened. Mark never even showed up to fight for me or even to hear my proposal for a peaceful resolution. Instead, his sister, Sarah, showed up about 20 minutes late just to drop off a cardboard box filled with my things from his apartment. She didn't even have the decency to look me in the eye or acknowledge the incredible amount of emotional growth I was showing by trying to meet. She just slammed the box on the table, nearly knocking over my expensive latte, and walked out without saying a single word to me. Julian tried to reach across the table and hold my hand, probably thinking this was his chance, but I pulled away because I'm still mourning the loss of my wedding day. Now Julian is acting all upset and moody, claiming that I'm leading him on just because I'm not ready to jump into bed with him 5 minutes after my fiancé dumped my clothes in a box. It's honestly shocking how selfish both of these men are being when I'm clearly the one who has lost the most in this entire situation. Update 2 comments. Anonymous user 1 says, you seriously tried to organize a trio meeting to see if they both just keep dating you? That is the most absurd, narcissistic thing I've ever heard. You wanted a polyamory resolution without even asking if they were into it. OP's reply, I just wanted there to be peace and for everyone to keep loving me without all this unnecessary fighting. Is it so wrong to want a world where love doesn't have borders? Anonymous user 2 says, Mark's sister is a legend. She did exactly what she needed to do, dropped your stuff and left you to your drama. She's the only person in this story who seems sane. OP's reply, she was actually very rude and insensitive to a person who is clearly in a deep state of mourning for her lost future. Update 3. It's been 1 month since my last update, and I decided to put everything on the line with one final eye test to see who truly deserves to hold my heart. I sent a very dramatic, very poetic email to both Mark and Julian, telling them that I was moving to a completely different city to find myself and escape the pain. I told them that I'd be at the local train station at exactly 5 p.m. if anyone wanted to stop me from leaving forever and show me they still cared. I wasn't actually planning on moving, obviously, because I haven't even packed a real suitcase, but I needed to see who would fight for me when the stakes were high. I stood there on the platform for 2 hours, looking wistfully at the tracks and trying to look like a girl in a French film who is about to lose everything. I even brought a suitcase full of my old shoes just to make it look heavy and realistic in case anyone was watching from a distance. Neither of them showed up, which is just proof that the men in this town have no sense of romance or commitment to a woman's soul. But the real betrayal came later that evening when I was scrolling through social media and saw a post that made my blood run cold. There was a photo of Julian and Mark together at a pub, clinking glasses and looking like they were having the best time of their lives. Apparently, they met up to a talk and decided that I had been playing them both for years, which is a complete and total lie because I was just being nice to everyone. They were bonding over how crazy they think I am, as if my big heart and my inability to hurt people is some kind of mental deficiency. So now my best friend and my former fiancé are suddenly best buddies, and I'm just sitting at a train station with a suitcase full of high heels and no ticket to anywhere. Update 3 comments. Anonymous user 1 says, "This is the best possible ending. The two guys realized the problem wasn't each other, it was you. A bromance born from the ashes of your wedding is actually kind of beautiful." OP's reply, "It's a betrayal of the highest order and a complete conspiracy against my character. They should be fighting over me, not drinking beer together." Anonymous user 2 says, "You tested them with a fake move and they both decided they'd rather let you leave than deal with you anymore. You literally failed your own test." OP's reply, "No, they are the ones who failed the test of true, unwavering devotion that a woman like me deserves." Update 4. It's been 3 months since my last update, and I've had to move back into my parents' house because apparently, no one is willing to support a woman who is going through a spiritual crisis. I found out through the grapevine that Mark is already dating someone new, some girl who wears sneakers all the time and probably doesn't even know what the term soulmates means. It's honestly insulting that he could move on so fast to someone so plain after having a love as deep and cinematic as what we shared. Julian won't even answer my texts anymore, and he had the nerve to tell my sister that he felt like he had finally woken up from a fever dream regarding his feelings for me. It's so typical of men to blame their own lack of emotional stamina on a dream instead of admitting they just weren't strong enough to handle my intensity. I've spent a lot of time thinking, and I've finally realized that my only mistake in all of this was being too pure and too good for this world. I tried so hard to protect everyone's feelings by refusing to make a cruel choice at the altar, and now I'm the one left with absolutely no one. My wedding dress is still sitting in a garment bag in the back of my closet, torn and stained with rain, which is a perfect metaphor for how society treats sensitive women. I'm essentially a martyr for a type of love that no one else was brave enough to handle, and I'm okay with that because I know my worth. I'll just wait here for the next chapter of my life to begin, hopefully one where the men are evolved enough to handle a heart as big and complex as mine. Until then, I'll just be here, being the only person who truly understands the depth of the tragedy I've endured.